Welcome to Otium the podcast. Thank you for joining us for this episode. My name is Ed Nzombi, and I am your host. Let's get to it.
Again, I'm going to remind our audience, if they have questions or thoughts, please feel free to put them in the comments section. Again, if you have questions around these topics, in particular the legal piece, you should seek counsel from legal in terms of lawyers and or a law firm. Steve, I like the way you kind of wrap that up with your thought on that. It was really good. In terms of a topic that you actually mentioned, you covered nonprofits. What is an attorney doing with a nonprofit? Creation and taxes. Tell me how people can benefit from a nonprofit, and how do you help them with creation and taxes?
Okay. Well, look, Ed, I think it always starts with someone who has some philanthropic intent. So if you have philanthropic intent, then there's lots of ways to exercise that philanthropic intent by setting up private foundations, setting up a nonprofit, setting up scholarship funds. I mean, there's a lot you can do. Why people do that? Well, some people do it because it does mitigate their tax burden. So you have some people that set up, you can mitigate your income tax burden, and you can mitigate your estate tax burden if that is something that would affect you. What you would do typically is set up either your own nonprofit corporation, or there's ways to do it that you really don't have to have your own corporation. You can set up through different kinds of funds, the Fidelities, the Schwabs. They have, basically something called donor advised funds, where it's your own personal charity that you just need to, fill out a application through them. But going back to the goals, it would be either maybe tax mitigation, or simply that there are ways to set up plan giving through their estate plan, so that they want to emphasize that with their family. Some families, just have philanthropic goals. Other reasons, generally it gets back to taxes. I hate to keep harping on that, Ed, but most people have some philanthropic intent, but they want to see how it might help them. And, essentially the government has done this so that, you get a break on your taxes if you give money to charities. Foundations, though, you can customize, and you can give to the kinds of organizations that you want. So it can be very customized. Some families actually create their own, as I call it, a foundation, but they can do things that nobody else has done with charity. They can come up with their own charitable purpose. I've had clients that, do anything from scholarship funds to dog rescue organizations, all kinds of different, I guess the world is your oyster. If you can think of a way that kind of meets a charitable purpose, generally you can do it.
So you make a good point about the charitable. I think there has to be a conviction or a passion for charitable efforts. On the same scale, you're saying that there is a consideration for taxes. Is there a certain tax bracket that benefits most from creating a non-charitable organization, or is it an income-based threshold where if you're making X $100,000 or $1 million a year or $2 million a year, it would be prudent to create a nonprofit?
I guess I'll say that it definitely can help if you're a wealthy individual. it can help you from an estate tax standpoint or an income tax standpoint. I always go back to, if you're not a charitable person, meaning you don't really have any philanthropic intent, it probably doesn't make sense to set up any of these types of entities, because you can always give to whoever you want. You don't need to go through an attorney, or you don't need to set up anything more complicated, because you just write a check to American Red Cross or whomever you want. Um, I would say that the wealthier if you're doing it for a tax reason, then sure, the wealthier you are probably makes more sense, because it's just those dollars that are taxed at a high rate that you just want some sort of mitigation, some relief for. And there's lots of ways, probably beyond this discussion, to do that. But ultimately, you can go two routes. You can set up your own fund or foundation, or you can go a less customized, but still you can have your own entity to fulfill your charitable goals.
So this probably will be a really interesting response to what is wealthy. Is it $1 million? People do ask that. They say, who is rich?
Yeah.
Who is wealthy? You hear about the top 1% in terms of income. But at the same time, I'm saying, is there something that you think of when you say wealthy? Is it a distribution of asset types, or is it literally they have a liquid amount in their bank account that quantifies?
Boy, that is a hard question. There is no set number for sure. There are certain thresholds that, if you're talking about from an estate tax standpoint, who would be subject to estate taxes, for instance. Yeah, there are definite thresholds. There's some state thresholds, federal thresholds. And if you are over that threshold, maybe from a definitional standpoint, maybe you could say that's wealthy because you're subject to estate taxes. I don't think there's any one right answer to that question. And maybe that was a trick question. I'm not sure, but
I just wanted to hear what you thought, because people do often talk about, is that person rich? Or when you keep saying wealthy, I myself am thinking, is there a threshold? Is there a number, to your point? And it's interesting you're adding the state and even tax brackets in terms of where that cutoff is, or where that indication that you are considered wealthy, whether you think you are or not.
Yeah.
Right.
And, it is a very difficult question, because who knows what wealthy is? I mean, some people have a few $100,000 in the bank and that's wealthy, and some people have 100 million and they don't think they're wealthy at all. I mean, it's just, but if you want to fulfill your charitable goals, you don't have to be wealthy. I mean, there's lots of ways to do it, and lots of charities need money and they would love to have donations. I would say, when I say the wealthy, that probably wasn't a great way of setting that out there, because there are people that have less means that set up these types of structures, and people have very high means that set up these structures. It does tend to be the people who are facing an estate tax and when I say wealthy, because they are looking to substitute dollars that would maybe go to the government in taxes, and they would prefer those dollars go to charitable organizations. And there's a way to set up your estate plan so that, by formula, dollars that would normally go to pay estate taxes can go to charity and therefore not pay taxes. So, if you look at it from that standpoint, there may be ways to mitigate your estate tax burden by using charity. But I don't want to suggest that that would be the only reason to be charitable. And as I said, there's lots of ways with charitable trusts, with private foundations, with charitable remainder type or structures, to basically integrate charity with a plan.
Right.
But it's not for everybody.
Listen, I think, Steve, that certainly each case is individual. And again, I would definitely seek counsel in terms of legal if you're looking to customize your situation with your actual numbers. If numbers are indicative of cutoff points, definitely seek counsel. But let's segue into one other area that I wanted to chat with you about, which is artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's heard of it. What do you see happening, perhaps in your space, with artificial intelligence in the legal profession?
Good question. And we actually just started a group that is, it's basically an artificial intelligence group. They do an intellectual property, but that is such a burgeoning area right now. From my standpoint, what is a little bit frightening is the fact that you could have a program, ChatGPT or one of these artificial programs, that can do things a lot faster than a human being, and sometimes better. So, for instance, maybe write a trust, maybe write a legal brief, maybe write a contract, maybe, write a prenuptial agreement, where they can do it, this program can do it very quickly, can get citations very, very fast, much quicker than a human, and do a pretty good job at it. And so where this is headed, who knows? But it could really affect the legal profession in the next, I don't know, 10 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 20 years, depends. But, I really see it replacing, a lot of what we do, because it's just it operates on such a fast level where, we're taught in law school, check citations and look at court cases. Well, if you have a program that can review an entire case in 30 seconds, that would take me an hour or two, that's scary stuff. And write a synopsis about it, and then look at 20 other cases that are similar and compare and contrast them in 3.5 minutes or less.
So it's interesting. You clearly said it's a concern, and that's great, because it's food for thought in any profession where automation can quickly do referencing, especially. Is it a situation where it's a bigger concern replacing your job duties, or, as I try to put out there when I speak on artificial intelligence, is it a requirement that you now help the artificial intelligence, because in some cases you can't substitute the validity or the accuracy?
Yeah, that's your point's well taken. I think ultimately it will be difficult for artificial intelligence to replace advice. Yes, I think right now it might be able to produce a document pretty quickly, but why you're doing that document, what your options are, what would be a better way to proceed, because, a lot of the law, especially what I do, is emotions and feelings, where, just because maybe the right answer isn't always the right answer. It just depends on what you think. A lot of it is subjective in nature. So I do think hopefully people see attorneys as offering value in that sense, where we are talking on a human level. AI is not going to tell you to not disinherit one of your kids. I mean, it might, but that's something you need to talk through to somebody. And some of this job is counseling. It's not all legal. Some of it is just pure counseling.
Good point.
And I don't know if AI is going to replace that so quickly. But where I see AI really affecting is really perhaps the documentation where, once you know what the plan is, once you know what to do, creating some sort of legal structure, whether it's a will or a contract. And maybe that's where, improvements will be made. And it may be good for everybody. It may make my job easier. It may reduce the costs of legal services. And I think that may be good for the public.
Excellent point, Steve. Does it mean that we're going to rewrite laws at some point? Do you see any connection there with the speed of assessing a correct statement with maybe the law needs to be changed? Is that a potential path?
Could be. Laws are made by human beings, and to the extent that we start relying heavily on this artificial intelligence, it could have an impact. That is interesting question, and I guess it's a little early to tell how that's going to play out. But it's affecting almost every industry, and we're just medicine, computer engineering, architecture. So it's something that we all have to just accept as reality. But yeah, I don't know if it will actually change laws, but maybe it will change the way people think of how we react to them or how we enforce them, etc.
Excellent. Well, that's a great point for us to tell you thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, because we covered a really interesting topic. I don't know how many times I've seen it in movies, but you're dealing with some very big certainties. AI is still evolving. And as you say, we're going to have to wait to see how that plays out. But death and taxes,
Yes.
you've heard
Nothing
that.
more certain than death and taxes. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts about that with us. And I'm sure there are audience members that are going to be provoked to go look deeper and think through their particular situations. But we certainly appreciate you joining us here on Ultium the podcast.
And thanks for having me. It was fun.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.